everybody. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us here for our co-community health talk about teen health. My name is Dr. Kerry Price. I'm an OBGYN and part of Orange Coast Women's Medical Group here in South County. And super pumped to come to you guys tonight and talk about teen health. Obviously, I wish we were all in person, as I'm sure many of you would love to be out and about doing your normal thing. But I'm also super proud to be part of this series through Hogue, and obviously a big part of Hogue's commitment to our patients is bringing health to the community and bringing information to you that's going to keep you happy and healthy. So even COVID can't stop us. We're doing this live YouTube stream. I've never done it before. I have excellent people here helping me that you can't see. Hopefully we all get through this smoothly, so bear with me as this is my first time doing a virtual talk with a live audience. That being said, we're going to go through some information about teen health, and then you're not going to see me during that. You're just going to hear me talking through so we can get some information out to you guys. And then obviously at the end, we're going to answer some questions, and you'll see me back on the screen, so that way we can do a semi-live question and answer. So obviously, I just wanted to, again, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you find the information helpful. And with that, I guess we'll go ahead and get started. So I'm going to go ahead and turn to my slides now so that you guys can see what I'm seeing in terms of the presentation, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so you can probably hear me now, just not see me. This first slide, actually, I figured would be easy. It's about me. Just a little introduction. So I am, again, an OBGYN at Orange Coast Women's Medical Group. I graduated from Lucerna High School in Whittier, California, all the way back in 2002, so clearly, compared to most of you on the audience, quite old. And then Scripps College in 2006, which is local to Claremont, California. I did my medical school at the University of Chicago, Pritzker School of Medicine, and then came back to do my residency at UCI. Obviously, I'm from Southern California, so Chicago was quite cold, and I wanted to come home back to a little bit nicer climate here in California. I'm married to my 8th grade sweetheart, Brian. Yes, we've been together that long, so a long time now. And I'm a mom to 2 daughters, so Julia, who's 8, Emily, 5, and then my 2 other children, my mini golden doodles, Ginger and Donut, who are super fun. And also there's a picture there, that's me in the goal there playing water polo. So I played water polo all the way through high school and college. That actual picture is from a college game. And I coached age group as well. So water polo is certainly near and dear to my heart, and obviously very popular here in Southern California. So that's always, I always like to do a little fun fact, and that was me in my younger, fitter days, like most of you in the audience, so I always like to keep that picture for motivation. So getting on to the talk now about teen health. So what is wellness, right? So you hear a lot out and about. Our teens especially have a lot of access to information these days, whether it's through talking with friends and family, and obviously things you learn in class, but beyond that, a lot of information on the internet, and obviously through social media. So when we think about health and wellness, I mean, obviously there's traditional thoughts about what wellness is, but it's not just your blood pressure or your weight or maybe your blood tests. It goes beyond that quite a bit. So what we're going to be looking at today are multiple aspects of wellness and health, because it relates a lot to each other. And obviously all these things come together to create a healthy individual. And so we don't want to miss certain aspects of things that aren't quite as concrete, and maybe aren't some things that you think of when you think of being healthy and well. And so we look at the wellness wheel. This is something we start to think about more as doctors, and especially when we think about our patients. So you can see physical health is just one of the aspects that we have there in terms of thinking about our patients as whole people and thinking about their health and wellness from a whole perspective. So you can see we have things like physical. We also have social, in terms of how patients interact with other people and with their peers. We have emotional, which I think is a big part of health and wellness, and certainly under the test this year with a lot of stresses and changes that people have had to make in their daily lives. We have spiritual, which can be things based on religion or cultural, obviously things that people make important decisions with regards to that. We have financial. We know that this impacts a lot of people in big ways. Changes in this can also impact them as well. And occupational. So for a lot of our teens out there, for you guys, that means school right now. But many of you probably have jobs, and you're going to have jobs. And so we think about how do jobs affect people's health and wellness, not just from their physical health, but also as it ties into some of those other things like financial, emotional, social, and environmental. And then you have environmental down there as well. So what is your environment? Who do you live with? Where do you live? And what do you eat? And what are you around every day? So a lot of these things actually contribute a whole lot to your general health. So we're going to think about emotional for a little bit. I think we've been spending a lot of time on that recently, and especially in recent years. We know that there's a lot of things on your guys' plate these days as teenagers, and there's a lot out there as well, again with the internet and social media, that can really affect your emotional health. So this is something that a lot of us have taken a special interest in, and I think especially real big stressors like COVID and other things this year have really brought emotional and mental health to the forefront. That's something I think it's really important to spend time on, and it's something obviously that we want you to start thinking about and also start talking about with your friends and family, especially if you feel like there's been changes or you feel like it impacts your general health. So we think about emotional health, and a big one this year is stress, right? So what is stress? And people define stress in a lot of different ways. It might be that patients just start to feel uncomfortable with certain scenarios, certain people, certain situations. It might be that you're worried or that you're more anxious about things as they happen around you or as things change. Sometimes people feel like they're scared. They might actually feel angry or frustrated and overwhelmed. And so all of these things can contribute to a lot of other things that are happening in your body, and also contribute a lot to some of the responses that you might have to those other parts of your day-to-day. So we think about stress not just as maybe something that's kind of hard, but it can encompass all of these feelings, and obviously it's something that can actually affect a lot of the physical aspects of your health and some of the physical signs and symptoms of that. So sometimes we see this play out as someone being tired, maybe being a little cranky. We certainly can see this translate into changes in how you sleep and the amount of rest that you get. Your willingness to participate in activities, things with other people. Obviously right now it's not happening as much, but normally, not maybe wanting to hang out with other people because it might add to some of these feelings. Or sometimes just not being able to concentrate as well. So these are all physical symptoms of stress that sometimes patients will see a doctor for, thinking that something medically is wrong with them, when clearly this is coming from them not feeling their best and healthiest when it comes to their emotional health. So this is why we talk about this, so that patients can start to realize that some of these symptoms might be coming from feelings like this. And causes, again, so what are causes of stress that we see in our teenagers, especially this year? So family dynamics, maybe it has to do with relationships with your parents or maybe your siblings. We're seeing a lot more of each other these days since we're all staying at home. And obviously that aspect of it can lead to some stress as well. You're in close quarters, everyone's on top of everyone, or maybe all in your business. Or obviously, just spending a lot of time with you, where normally you're doing things with your friends, or you're playing your sports, or you're going to work. And so these are things we see. Social aspects and the lack thereof. So not just the interactions normally with your friends in school and work, but this year, the lack of some of those things. So not seeing your friends as often, or being able to go to your physical school. Or maybe you can't go to work, or your job, ended or stopped because of this. And so we're looking at social aspects. Obviously your chemistry and your genetics. There's a lot of things about us, how we're wired, how we're made, and makes each of us unique, but also causes each of us to respond differently to some of these stressors. And also maybe we're more predisposed, some of us, to being more anxious or sometimes more upset with things. So that's something we look at too in your family history. There's normal changes with age. So the older you get, like some of us, the more you have going on. Responsibilities and different things come along your way, and a lot of that adds to some of the stress that people can feel. And also environmental, so things happening around you, right? And obviously, again, the pandemic is a very easy example this year, but there can be things happening nationally, internationally, and locally that all cause people to change how they do things, why they do things, and how they respond to things. So stress in the body, like I was talking about earlier, stress can honestly change just about everything you've got going on. It affects almost every system of the body that we have. Obviously hormones, which a lot of people come into me and tell me they want their hormones checked, their hormones are off, their hormones are imbalanced, and honestly, as we peel back the layers of things, I realize that my patients are just under a lot of stress, and their hormones 9 times out of 10 are perfectly normal. It can affect the nervous system, both voluntary and involuntary, and again, that can lead sometimes to things like fatigue. It can lead to sometimes feeling pain. We have people that also have changes in their menstrual cycle, which that's a big one. If I could rename 2020 the year of anything, it would be the year of the weird period for just about everyone, my teenagers and on up, because stress really can affect how often you menstruate, how your flow is. It can cause people to skip cycles or have more than one cycle in a month, so we know that that's a big one. The GI system, again, people's guts get really affected by stress. How often they go to the bathroom, sometimes too much, sometimes not enough. Sometimes we see a lot of nausea or gastric upset. And so this is bloating, again, abdominal and pelvic pain. So this is something we find a lot, and everything from a medical standpoint we work up can be normal. Again, the immune system. People can feel really run down. They feel tired. They can get sick easier when they're under a lot of stress. And obviously sleep. Like we talked about earlier, it can really affect your sleep, your ability to sleep and to sleep soundly and to get good rest. And we all know that sleep is another big cornerstone of a lot of the things above it on that list, but also weight. You know, a lot of patients come in frustrated about weight gain or weight loss, and they're not doing well with weight. And I see this in my teens, and I see it in older patients as well. And sometimes we really have to go back to some of these very basic things like sleep. So how do we deal with stress? Well, I think the first thing, it's important to know that stress is normal and it's common, right? It's not something that people should feel like they're alone in feeling, and it happens to everybody. And it's also really important to know that we can't avoid all the stress in our daily lives, but we can learn that there's healthy ways to deal with it. And also we can look at coping strategies that are gonna not only help us with our stress now, but it's gonna make us stronger and better able to deal with stress later on in life. And we know from a lot of studies that if we establish good habits when you're younger, that's going to translate into being a healthier adult, to having healthier relationships, to being more successful in your later endeavors in life, because you're going to be able to, you know, really set yourself aside and figure out a game plan when things are hard or difficult. And so if you look at here, right, stress, initially we all feel awful. It's not great, we don't like it, but obviously we can see positive and negative coping strategies. And again, positive coping strategies, the ones that we work on with maybe our mental health provider, maybe our primary care physician, maybe our pastor or someone at our church, or maybe a trusted adult or friend, and working through these in a healthy way are going to give us the tools that we feel better for a really long time, and are going to help us to deal with those things as we go through life. Negative coping strategies, I think we're all very familiar with, but those are things like drugs and alcohol. Obviously, you know, experimenting in not so great behavior when it comes to doing risky things or risk-taking behavior. And we know that these things can maybe make us feel better for a short time, but can lead actually right back to having a lot more stress or consequences that in the long run really lead to negative health outcomes. And obviously, you know, it's important that we try to avoid those as best we can. And also for you teenagers out there to recognize those people around you, that if you're friends or people that you know, if you're seeing some of the signs of these things, to help and try to see what's going on with that person. So healthy ways to cope, right? So what are some of the ways you cope with stress? I think a lot of people know some of the ways they cope with stress, they just maybe haven't thought of them before. So you see some pictures of some lovely young ladies here doing some meditation. We know meditation is a really great one when it comes to stress. I have actually started meditating myself this year when it came to the COVID pandemic. You can imagine being a doctor in a pandemic, not so awesome. But at the same time, right, it helps me to take better care of myself, and then I can take better care of my patients. So that's something that is really easy to start. You can find apps for that. There's programs for that. If your mom or dad has a Peloton, sneak onto that app and do the meditation classes. You can find those for free, and they're everywhere. And this has been a really well-studied tool to help us deal with stress. That can involve breathing exercises. It can involve meditating. It can involve you know, sitting down and really making lists about what's bothering you and how we can better make a plan for that. There's also some physically healthy ways that we deal with stress, like exercise. Exercise is a big one. That's well studied as well. Obviously right now, not a lot of gyms are open. There might be some limited ways in how you can exercise, but try to get out and get some fresh air. Go for a walk, go for a run, walk the dog. Doing those things we know can help, yoga and Pilates and anything you can work on at home. Swimming if you've got a pool. There's a lot of things that you can do that help with stress. So we know that there's a lot of healthy things that don't involve a whole lot of money or time, and they can lead to healthy, better habits for sure. So again, on this next slide, right? Healthy ways to cope. Sleep, talking with your friends, family, or a trusted adult or friend. Exercise, music if you're musically inclined, which I used to be and not so now. But really, if you're playing that musical instrument or diving into that hobby, whether that's art or cooking or volunteering to make things better around you in the community. And again, relaxation techniques like meditation, lots of good data behind there. So that's a little bit about the emotional part of things. I think that's something that I'm hoping you're all more aware of these days. I think it's important to be aware of those things. And I think it's also important to really talk about those things and be open about those things, because that's how, as a society and a community, we all get better and healthier when we realize that, tough times are tough for everybody. And so the more that we can do to take care of ourselves mentally leads to all of us being healthier, happier people. So let's talk a little bit too about the social aspect of health. I think that's important for teenagers, especially because y'all run in packs. So we like to think about how do we address not only your individual health, but your health within your group of friends. So when it comes to social health, there's a lot of things I think that are important these days to think about, not just being yourself as an individual, but how do you interact with other people? So you see all these little notes from me. On the one hand, you have my mom advice and then my other mom advice. So it's like, be friendly, but don't get stepped on, right? Be open-minded, but know that your values and your opinions matter. We talk about being supportive, but expect that from other people as well. Listen carefully to your friends, obviously, when they come to you with concerns, but obviously choose friends who listen for you in return. And use social media with caution. This is a big one. You probably all rolling your eyes out there in the audience because you hear us talk about this a lot as adults, but it's true. We didn't grow up with it the way you guys are growing up with it today. And there can be a lot of extra stress and anxiety and making you feel not so great about yourself that comes through this constant, social media that's in your face. It can bring you great things like this Teen Health Talk 101, but it can also bring you a lot of things that were not so great too. So, sometimes you might just need to unplug yourself, and that's okay. It's okay to not constantly be wondering what everyone's doing all the time, or constantly looking for what everyone's doing all the time, or constantly thinking about what you're doing compared to everyone all the time. It's okay. It's okay to take breaks when you need it, and it's actually really good for you. Obviously, communicating with your parents. You'll hear us say that a lot too, and again, eye rolls all around. But it's actually good to have a good open relationship, and maybe if it's not your parents, maybe it's with a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle or an older sibling or another trusted adult, someone that you can go to when you have concerns and who knows about you and what's going on with you and keeping you healthy. And obviously seeking help when you need it and knowing that you're strong for asking for help. I think that's also really important because, again, a lot of people are embarrassed sometimes when they feel like stuff is going on and they're not quite sure who to talk to about or what to do. But it's okay. Not all of us have the answers for everything. And even when people come to see me in the office as a doctor, I don't always have the answer to everything, but I always want to come from a place of trying to figure, at least hearing my patient, listening to what people have to say, and trying to figure out what are our next best steps that we can do to make things better. And that's the same thing you can take with you out in your daily world, right? And when you're interacting with your friends and with people your age. So then we get to the physical aspect of health, which is kind of more my wheelhouse. I try with the emotional and social just for my own growing up experience and being a parent myself. But obviously the physical aspect of health is the one that I'm probably most suited for in terms of keeping you healthy. And so, of course, it's always about all the blah, blah, right? The healthy diet and the exercise, but it's really important. And that's because you guys these days have all kinds of choices in terms of where you can go, what you can do, what you can eat. And it's important to know that a healthy diet obviously is the cornerstone for a lot of healthy things that come down the road. And that can affect, again, things like your period, things like development of how your body looks and feels. It can definitely impact things that later on happen in life, like pregnancy. So this is something that for women, especially, we focus on from an early age in terms of making sure that patients are taking good care of themselves, not just to make sure that you're keeping yourself right from a lady perspective, but also trying to prevent some of those other not so great things. That can happen to all of us, like high blood pressure and diabetes and problems with cholesterol and obesity, which are all things that we're seeing on the rise these days in medicine. And obviously thinking about healthy diets that include fruits and veggies. Whole grain products are great. We know that that's going to be healthier for you than some of your white grains and refined sugar breads. Dairy products, although we know that some patients out there are going to have intolerances and sensitivities to dairy, so sometimes it's working with your pediatrician or your primary care doc or your gynecologist on what are some other ways that you can get in your calcium. Obviously protein, super important. You're still growing and changing and maturing, and so we like to make sure that you're going to have all the tools you need to do that. And these sources of protein, whether they're plant or animal based, are going to be important. And water. I constantly yell at people all day, well, not yell, I constantly encourage people strongly to drink a lot of water. And that's because we know the average person doesn't get a lot of water, and that leads to a lot of things too. Other medical things going on with your body, your skin texture and acne and breakouts, hair and hair health. Again, things like UTIs and vaginal infections, gastrointestinal upset can all literally be as simple as drinking more water. And if you think about it, I have that one of those awesome Starbucks tumblers. I'm a total hoarder of those things. I go in and grab them when they put 4 on the shelf, and I have a whole cabinet full. But if you think about the amount of water that's in one of those tumblers, I, in a regular office day, will typically have 4 to 6 of those, and I'll usually have 1 or 2 before and after work. So that's a lot of water, and obviously there's a lot of peeing that comes with that. But at the same time, it's really important to think about staying properly hydrated because that affects the rest of your health. Then we think about bone mass too, because that's dietary related, and half of your bone mass is comprised in adolescence. So right now, again, you're growing, you're changing, and again, your bones are growing and changing with you. So factors that affect bone mass, again, genetics. So we know that we are a little bit of our parents, so things that can sometimes pass down in families, like bone disorders and bone problems are things we think about. Weight-bearing exercise. Again, exercise, super important, not just to keep you healthy, keep your heart healthy, keep your weight healthy, but also keeps your bones healthy. Calcium, again, whether that's through dairy products or some other forms of food in your diet. Sometimes it might even be through supplementation, which we can work on with patients depending on their dietary sensitivities. Vitamin D, which our natural source of vitamin D is sunlight, but unfortunately, we try to prevent skin cancer, right, by putting on sunblock, which is great for skin cancer prevention, but not so great for us absorbing vitamin D. So this is something that we actually check sometimes with your routine blood work, so that we see if patients need to get extra D into their diet. And then again, protein. Again, protein, calcium, vitamin D all go together when it comes to healthy muscle and healthy bones. So iron, and you also have increased iron needs as a teen. It helps to support building healthy muscle mass, blood supply, and also because you're menstruating. And this is sometimes when your periods are sort of all over the place, whether they're regular, irregular, heavy, or kind of just random. Every time you bleed, you lose iron, and so your body has to replace that. So by having appropriate amounts of iron in your blood, you can create that muscle mass and blood supply to be in a healthy place. And obviously an iron deficiency can lead to you not feeling so great, and this is just can again set up as fatigue or sometimes other things like that. So iron sources are in your diet are better than supplements. We know that your gut absorbs iron better than supplements. Actually, it's really random, but most of you probably know also too, because y'all are, again, smart and have the access to the Google. But most of the vitamins and supplements that we take, a good majority of that we actually pee out. So it's not a whole lot that we actually absorb. And so we actually want you to get most of your minerals, your vitamins, your iron through your food. And again, sometimes working with your dietary choices, sensitivities, allergies, things like that, we might work with your primary care doctor, sometimes even a GI doctor, to make sure that we're doing that right. We also think about good versus bad fats. You have pictures of good fats on the top and then deliciously bad fats on the bottom corner. Those are Jack in the Box tacos, one of my favorite things. Not so great for you though. So good fats, again, samples of that, unsaturated fats, and they're gonna be nuts, seeds, certain veggies, avocados, we have olive oils, and healthy fish. So those are all going to be good sources of fat that help, again, with hair and skin and nails. They help you with smooth muscle. They help you also with keeping a good balance of cholesterol. And then you have the not so good or saturated or trans fat. Again, those delicious tacos in the bottom right. That's going to be your junk food, your potato chips, cookies, processed foods, all the really good stuff essentially they bring you on DoorDash that you realize shouldn't be eating too much of. And that being said, again, this talk is not all about someone being a certain weight or a certain size. We think about in medicine a BMI, which is your height and your weight combined into a pattern in terms of where you should be. So again, we're just trying to think about not only keeping your weight healthy, but keeping the rest of you healthy. And again, these are also important for your heart, and they're important for those other body systems I mentioned too. And then we think about portion sizes. So portion versus serving. The most recommended portions are actually smaller than you think. So we look at, we tell patients, we try to encourage patients to look at your boxes and bags and things and labeling, and you'll find that actually a serving or a portion size are not the same thing. So portion sizes continue to grow, but we're the same size, right? So you might get this huge plate of nachos, but a serving is really like the bottom corner of it, right? And that's what you should be eating in terms of that amounts of calories and fat and sodium and all these other things. So the tips we have for eating out are obviously, now here in California, we have better rules about this, but looking at the calorie content for the meal, looking at individual aspects. If you are someone who's trying to lose weight or maintain a healthy weight, or your doctor for other health reasons has talked to you about looking at portion sizes, most of the time, again, in our teens, we try not to be super focused on a certain weight or body size or trying to make you guys eat a certain way. We just want you to establish good, healthy eating habits that are going to carry through again when you're an adult. And this means eating an appropriate amount of food that's going to help you to exercise and do your day-to-day activities and keep your weight healthy and keep your body healthy and not overeating or leading, unfortunately, to things like obesity, because we know that that, again, is linked to a lot of other medical problems. There's also another resource you can go to choosemyplate.gov. So this is set up by the government's authority essentially on keeping us healthy when it comes to obesity prevention. So you can look and see there, that's an average serving of what we think we should be doing in a meal. Veggies and fruits, you can see, are more than half of the meal or the recommended meal amount. Whole grains and lean proteins make up most of the other half. Dairy should be a smaller serving, healthy, low in fat and high in protein if possible. So something like a Greek yogurt. And again, water, 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 water. So you're going to wash all this down with water because hydration helps you, again, to move things through in a normal way, to help you absorb it the best you can, and to make sure that your body has the tools that it needs. And then we come to exercise, right? So another important aspect of physical health is exercise. Our bodies were made to move. As you can see, I put some of my favorite ladies on here that like to move on a regular basis. Super bummed we didn't get to see Simone this year in gymnastics, but looking forward to next year, which she'll be in Tokyo, hopefully. But physical and mental benefits as well, right? So think about the mind-body connection about exercise. And also, again, it's good for relieving stress. It's good for helping you to stay healthy and feel good about yourself and your body. Aerobic exercise obviously is great for your cardiovascular system. It helps your blood pressure. It helps your resting heart rate to be nice and normal. It helps to keep your circulation in good order. And obviously we think about strength training, so that, again, for not just people who play sports, but weight-bearing exercises, again, help to burn fat. They help to build muscle. They help to keep people's bones healthy. So all of these things combined help to keep your mind and your body in good connection, and obviously can also lead to better sleep, lead to endorphins, which are produced when you exercise, which actually neurochemically makes you happy. And obviously, back in the day, and hopefully once this COVID is over, these are things you can do with friends, right? Go for a run, playing sports, getting back into those things that help people to not only develop good interpersonal relationships, but keeping their bodies healthy as well. So that's a little bit of kind of the basic things, but again, I am an OBGYN, so my priority especially comes towards women's health. And when we think about our teens, we know this is a kind of different time in your life. You know, you're not a kid anymore, you're becoming an adult, and obviously some adult things are coming up in terms of just things about your cycle, potentially being sexually active or something that might come down the road and having questions about that, or seeing friends go through some of those things and having questions about that, or starting to talk to your parents about some of these things, because obviously it can change a lot about your life, thinking about being sexually active in terms of preventing infections and diseases, preventing pregnancy, and some of the changes that come with that. So that's why we really want to make sure that this is incorporated in the talk. Again, just to be, aware that you guys are going through a transition and becoming adults and are adults. And so that's going to be something that's important to us too. So what is sexual health when we think about that? So again, from an OBGYN perspective, it includes more than just preventing unintended pregnancies or avoiding STDs. It's also thinking about the ability to embrace and enjoy sexuality throughout our lives. So this is something where, it's going to be different for every person. There's going to be different cultural and religious aspects that influence how we talk about sex with our patients. There's going to be different experiences they might have had, or experiences friends or family might have had that influence how they think about sex. And there's going to be questions and problems that come up. And so that's really one of the things as OBGYNs I think a lot of us have a passion for is kind of helping people to figure out how do they feel about things, and then obviously helping in that next bullet, as you see, defining who that person is sexually, who they love, who they feel like their partner is, and feeling comfortable and confident to make those choices in an informed way, and also to know that those choices are different for everyone and that that's okay. And also that those choices might even change as you become an adult. They might be certain things at certain points in your life and then totally 180 when you get older. So those are things we see a lot, and we encourage patients to be really open and honest with us, and again, with that parent or grandparent or sibling or friend, so that we make sure that we're taking care of a person, again, from the inside out. And as you see there at the bottom, not everyone follows the textbook, right? We all have gray areas. So it's important to know that things change, and you might have questions and changes as they come along, and that's okay. So the beginning of all of it, right? Puberty, what's happening to my body? Exactly. I still don't know, to be honest. I've gone through a lot of school and seen a lot of people, and I still have those patients that just never seem to fit the bill. But puberty is just the beginning of your sexual maturity. You're becoming a woman. And we see it in all kinds of things. Breast development. Some people have growth spurts like yours truly, and they're taller than everyone for a good number of years. It can be changes in your periods. Again, changes in the frequency of how often you get a period, the amount of flow you have, if it's painful or not. This can come along with hair everywhere in different places. Obviously, skin changes like acne, which is really common for most of us as we go through this. Different body odors can also be fun and interesting. So these are all normal changes. Patients come in for this all the time to just be like, what is going on with me? And it's important to know that those changes happen in phases, and they continue to happen as you get older. And something where it's kind of this spectrum of moving through. And it happens again in your 20s, and we kind of go through another change in our 30s and our 40s, and then there's menopause later on. So a woman's body is constantly changing, which is kind of a cool thing about it, but at the same time, it leads to a lot of people wanting to know what's going on. So the menstrual cycle, just to kind of give you an overview, because periods are probably the big thing that people have questions about. As you can see on the left there, we have a little circle in terms of how the period looks from days in the cycle. And this is based on a 28-day cycle, which is an average or common thing you might read. But hey, guess what? You can have a cycle that's 30 days or 24 days or 45 days or 90 days, and that still might be your normal. So it's important to not freak out if they're not 28. And it also might not be 28 every month. That's also totally fine. Periods can move around by anywhere from around 3 to 7 days in a month, and that's still normal. As a gynecologist, we still think that's normal. And it's important to know, especially as you're going through puberty, maybe in your early teens and your mid-teens and your late teens, these cycles might change in terms of how often you see them. But pretty much for most people, the first half of the cycle is variable when you have your period, the uterine lining thickens and ovulation occurs, but pretty much most everyone after they ovulate is going to have a period 10 to 14 days later. So it's that back half of the cycle that for most people is pretty clockwork, but that first part can be a little variable in terms of how long it is. And then you see on the right-hand side there, this is what happens to the uterine lining, or what we call the endometrium. That's essentially what is the blood that you bleed every month as a period is doing over the course of things. In the middle, you'll see the hormones that change a lot throughout the cycle to give you those changes in endometrium. And that's driven all by the top, which is that little egg that develops into a follicle, then ovulates or bursts, and then makes this other little cyst behind it called a corpus luteum cyst that supports your progesterone and keeps that lining around in case a baby's going to implant there, get fertilized and implant. And then if nothing happens, it goes right back into period, and then we start all over. But I want you guys to look at the middle part of that graph. As you can see, that graph is not a straight line, right? None of those lines are a straight line. So when people come in, they're like, my hormones are all over the place. I'm like, yeah, they are. And that's because they change all throughout your cycle, and they change from cycle to cycle. So it's important to know that it's normal to see ranges. That's why we have wide ranges when it comes to blood work. It's also important to see on that top part that ovulation, that thing is bursting, and that's literally what is happening. So that's why when some patients complain of mid-cycle pain, or feeling a sharp pain, or that they ache for a couple days around ovulation, around the middle part of their cycle, it's because literally that little cyst is bursting and releasing fluid and sometimes blood and that egg into the abdominal cavity to get picked up by the tube. And so yeah, it's not uncommon for people to have pain. And actually it has a name. It's called Middle-Schmerz syndrome. Some guy, Middle-Schmerz, found it. But that's all it is. It just means pain with ovulation. So as you can see, there's a lot going on in the normal menstrual cycle, and so it's common to see some of these symptoms and things. So when we think about the menstrual cycle, right, it's important to think about those changes because, again, that little egg ovulates, and if it is around sperm, it can get fertilized. So that kind of leads us into talking a little bit about how does that correlate then with being sexually active and thinking about pregnancy prevention, because that's another big aspect of as OBGYNs of what we do. So there's me on the left in the beginning of all of this when I had to start wearing all this stuff to work every day. You can see my feelings about that. Obviously, not my favorite, but doing what I need to do to stay healthy, as I'm sure all of you are doing the same. So that's my feeling though also about STIs. I don't love them. And so when it comes to, again, things that are big things that as OBGYNs we're trying to reduce is the rate of things like unintended pregnancies and teen pregnancies, and transmission of sexually transmitted infections, because those are two big items on our list of to-dos. It's kind of a bummer. You know, our country ranks first among all developed countries in both teenage pregnancies and STDs. And in this case, it is not good to be number one. And when it comes to that, why is that, or why do we think that is? Well, obviously, we have a whole population of you guys out there, teenagers, and it really depends on your access to care and your access to information as to whether or not we get people in early. We talk about these things. And obviously, if you got a great support system at home, namely probably all of you who are watching this tonight with your parents, or your parents were like, hey, you need to watch this, it's because they want you to have that information to make good choices, to make smart choices, and to not be in that statistic. So we know that for sexually transmitted infections, teens are at increased risk for this. We know that you guys are out there, you're experimenting with what stuff is going on and with people, and you're having relationships, and you're starting to explore these feelings that you have and these changes in your body. And so we know that that sometimes leads to an increased risk because of the increase in number of partners. Teens, unfortunately, are 50% of all of our new cases of sexually transmitted infections. And 1 in 2 people who are sexually active will have an STI by the age of 25. So it's really important for us, again, as healthcare providers, and especially those of us who start to see you in your teenage years, that we're constantly, and that's why we're not trying to pry, we're just asking you about what's going on with you and what are you up to, because we're trying to make sure that we try to prevent this as much as we can. And it's important also to know that STI infections can be spread through any sexual contact. So not just what we call penetrative intercourse, which is the traditional, but this can be through oral intercourse or other forms of foreplay and things that people are up to, because we can get still mucosa to mucosa and bodily fluid transmission. So it's important to know that that's a thing. It really is a thing. That's not just a myth. So we think about, this is actually, and I laugh because these slides were gifted to me from one of my former partners, Dr. Cholera, who gave this talk before. She categorized STIs into like how they show up, basically. So you have sores, drips, warts, and uncommon but dangerous. So sores means things that show up with bumps or ulcers, and these can be things like syphilis. Obviously herpes, I think, is what most people are familiar with, and something that shows up as bumps or something painful. Chancroid and lymphogranuloma verinarium are more rare, but probably herpes and syphilis are the two we see most commonly here. Drips are basically abnormal vaginal or cervical discharge. Can be things like gonorrhea, chlamydia, and trichomonas. Warts, again, genital warts can be HPV, and if you look down at the bottom, HPV is also the virus that causes the majority of cervical cancer. So that's why you'll see and hear us talk a lot about the vaccine Gardasil. Many of you have already had it. It's been standard on the pediatric schedule for some time. And now actually the FDA approved it to include women up to the age of in their early 40s. So this is something that actually we know is really important for preventing cervical cancer, but also many of the strains of HPV that cause genital warts. And then we have uncommon but dangerous. So again, HIV and AIDS and hepatitis, much lower rates of transmission, but obviously when they are transmitted, some really serious health consequences. And so when we think about all of these things, again, some of these things can have symptoms, as you see up above, but some of them actually, like HPV, gonorrhea and chlamydia, can actually be transmitted and a person may not even have any symptoms, either the person who has it or the partner that they're with. And so it's really important to, again, always be open with partners, talking about if they've been tested for sexually transmitted infections, using a barrier method of protection like a condom, whether it's male or female condom. Obviously, once you do become sexually active, coming in for testing, even if you don't have any symptoms, because as your provider, we want to keep you healthy. And again, we want to make sure that we're testing and treating you for these things because a lot of these things have other health implications and fertility implications, and so it's important to take care of those in a timely fashion. So that's why this next slide, oh my God, get yourself tested. I think that's what the GYT stands for. So again, 1 in 2 sexually active young people will get an STI, but some of those people aren't going to know. So again, using protection, i.e. a barrier method. And that's even if you're someone who's on birth control or have an IUD or have an Nexplanon. Those things are awesome and they prevent pregnancy, but they don't protect you against infections. So we still recommend using a barrier method for extra pregnancy prevention, but also to keep you healthy. And definitely we're going to recommend using a barrier method with any new partner. We recommend getting tested every time you have a new partner and making sure your partners get tested. And I put there again, mom quote, be mean, right? It's your health. If you ask someone about them getting tested and they're being weird with you, then peace out. You don't need to be with them anyway. There's plenty of other nice people out there because it's important. It's important for your health and it's important to stick up for yourself. And obviously down there at the bottom, see your OBGYN if you have any concerns for infection. 9 times out of 10 people come in and they're fine, but I'm so happy that they come in if they have concerns because I want them to feel comfortable to come in and see me when they want to. And protect yourself. You've got this, right? So along with barrier methods, we also encourage patients to maybe thinking about talking about this with your mom, dad, step-parent, family member, counselor, or trusted adult who can help you navigate the process. Make an appointment with your OBGYN to discuss birth control options and what fits you in your lifestyle. And we have examples there. So I'm going to wrap that up. I was kind of fast on that last slide because obviously I wanted to leave some time for questions. So I'm going to move my computer over here. And so some of the questions that we had during the talk, obviously, so when should I schedule my first gyne appointment? That's a good one, actually. So really, in terms of scheduling your first routine gynecological visit is mostly when you feel comfortable or have questions pertaining to your menstrual cycle, birth control, STI prevention, or sexual health. In terms of your physical, when do we start physicals and pap smears? It's actually age 21. So we don't do PAPs earlier, even if you're sexually active. We do recommend pelvic exams and testing if you're sexually active before the age of 21. I would say most patients see me between the ages of 16 and 18, just to kind of pop in, see what's going on. A lot of time they're graduating from your pediatrician or your primary care doctor's office, or maybe you feel more comfortable with a woman doing the exam. So I would say that's probably a good rule of thumb. And then our next question we got, if you're the teenager visiting you, is everything we discuss confidential? Yes, 100%. Everything you talk about with your doctor in the gynecology office is 100% confidential. There's actually laws about that in the state of California and nationally. You can actually come into your OBGYN for reproductive health services without an adult, and that's fine. Your parents might be clamoring to talk to us on the phone about what might have gone on at your visit or medications or things that we've made. And honestly, I don't tell them anything unless you okay to share or you'd prefer me to share it with your parent. It's important to know, though, that if you're on your parent's insurance and we prescribe medication or do testing, then those things are going to show up on their explanation of benefits. So that's where we try to tell patients we want to have good open communication with your parents for that reason. But at the same time, everything you talk about with me in the office or any one of my partners is going to be 100% confidential. So our next question, what should I expect in my first gyne visit? Well, that's a good question too, because it sort of depends on why you have your visit. A lot of visits that we do for the first time are just talking. So you get to keep all your clothes on, and we just talk. And that maybe is because your period's heavy and awful, and we're gonna talk about ways to make that better. Or you haven't become sexually active with your boyfriend, but maybe you're thinking about that, and we're gonna talk about birth control. Obviously, if you're coming in for things like abnormal discharge or pain, a breast concern, anything related to a physical sign or symptom, we're probably gonna do an exam of that area. But if something is more about talking, like birth control options, or ways to make your period better, or concerns you have about things like that, then a lot of times we just talk. Your first full exam, breast and pelvic and pap smear, again, is at age 21. So until that time, unless there's a specific concern or testing that's requested, we let you leave your clothes on. Kind of nice. Then let's see, this one. So do barriers always protect against STIs? So in medicine, as in life, we have learned that there's always like that 1% out there, right? In terms of sometimes a condom will break. Sometimes there'll be something else that happens and we see the transmission of infection. That being said, barrier methods like condoms are really, really effective at preventing the transmission of sexually transmitted infections, to where we should feel really good about our chances of not having any infection if you actively use a barrier method and use it routinely every time. It is important though to check to make sure a condom hasn't broken. And it's still important, even if you're gonna use a condom, to make sure you still ask that partner about their testing history or an STD history. And even if you use a condom, we still encourage patients to come in and get tested to make sure that they're fine. And then it looks like this question here, if you're not sexually active, do we need a pap smear? So the answer is yes, and that's because the pap smear tests for cervical cancer. And we have obviously a certain number of patients that are virginal or have never been sexually active, and you can still have cervical cancer. Your cervix, just like your uterus, your ovaries, your breasts can have precancerous or cancerous changes, and that's what the pap smear tests for. So the pap smear is a cervical cancer test. Yes, we also test for HPV, which is a sexually transmitted infection, but first and foremost, we're looking at the cells themselves. And so even in my patients who've never been sexually active, if they're 21, I'm gonna recommend that they have their full physical and that they have their pap smear. The good news is pap smear guidelines have changed recently in the last several years. So pap smears actually used to be every year for me and your mom and everyone else out there. But now they're actually every 3 years. So it's every 3 years, plus or minus HPV testing. If a pap smear comes back abnormal, we follow those a little bit more routinely on an annual basis until we meet a certain timeline. If someone has a precancerous change, we follow those patients yearly. But if you have a good, healthy pap smear and you're not sexually active and nothing has changed, that's every 3 years. And then at what age can your appointments be kept private from your parents? So again, that's a good question. It's at any age really. So in the state of California, I believe you can be as young as 16 and present for reproductive services. It changes all the time, so I always have to look that one up. But you can come for an appointment by yourself, sign your own consent forms, agree to your own testing. Again, it all comes down to what you use to pay for your appointment. So that's why I tell patients, your appointment, everything that happens at your appointment is private and confidential. But if you come in on your mom's insurance, your dad's insurance, there's gonna be something that pops up on their insurance that you saw your OBGYN. Some patients choose for that reason to pay out of pocket for their visit. Some patients choose to go to our clinics like Planned Parenthood or other family health centers that we have throughout Southern California, where it's a sliding scale, so the visit is cost effective. You still have access to an OBGYN. You still have access to screening for STIs. You still have access to birth control, but it might be a lot less expensive than going to a private practice office. That being said, we work with our teens a lot if cost is an issue in terms of what their questions are. So it's important to know that the insurance sometimes kind of outs you, or at least lets your parents know that you've been to the doctor, but there's nothing on there other than that. All it sees is that they've been to the doctor, and your record is still your private record. So I think when it comes to that, again, a lot of teens are really concerned about their privacy, and we want to not only build that relationship with you, but we want to gain your trust, and we want to keep that trust. So our goal is not to necessarily go around you that way. It's really to make sure that you're healthy. Now, that being said, caveat: if during a visit you talk about hurting yourself or other people, you have something that I'm really concerned about your health and well-being and your safety, there are mandatory state and national guidelines that we need to report that, because we need to make sure you're okay. That is like the one thing outside the box. But when it comes to your reproductive health, that's between you and us.
No questions.
All right. Well, it sounds like all the questions are done for tonight. We had plenty of time for you guys to type. Thank you again so much for joining us. I hope it was helpful. I hope it was doable. I hope that this helped you in some way, and thank you so much for bearing with me with my first live talk. If you have questions, we're welcome and happy to see you in the office. But I hope that all of you have a very safe and happy and healthy holiday season with your families. Please follow all the rules out there. Wash your hands, wear your masks, stay healthy so that we can stay healthy and take care of you. And I hope 2021 is a lot better and normal, guys. So I look forward to seeing you in person then.